The galaxy had many powerful empires. Some ruled with fleets that could burn planets. Some ruled with ancient technology that no one else understood. And some ruled simply through fear. But among all those powerful civilizations, there was one species the galaxy did not take seriously. Humans. Earth had joined the Galactic Council only 30 years ago. Compared to the ancient alien empires, humanity was young. Their technology was impressive, but their attitude confused everyone. Humans talked about peace. They preferred negotiations instead of battles. They built embassies and sent diplomats instead of fleets. To many alien leaders, that meant only one thing. Humans were weak. Ambassador Daniel Reyes had heard those whispers many times. He was Earth's main diplomat in the Orion sector. His job was simple in theory but difficult in practice. Keep peace between species that often hated each other. Daniel was known for something unusual. Patience. While other diplomats shouted, he listened. While others threatened war, he offered solutions. Over the years he had stopped 3 border conflicts and prevented 2 wars. Many species respected him. But not everyone. The Zerath Dominion did not respect anyone. They were one of the most aggressive powers in the galaxy. Their empire spread across dozens of star systems, and they believed strength was the only thing that mattered. To them, diplomacy was weakness. And humans were easy targets. One quiet evening on the human embassy station, Daniel Reyes sat in his office reading reports from Earth. Outside the large window, the stars of the Orion sector shined calmly. Trade ships moved slowly across space lanes. It looked peaceful. But Daniel knew peace in the galaxy was always fragile. A soft beep came from his desk. An incoming transmission. His assistant, Lieutenant Mara Collins, stepped into the office. "Ambassador," she said, frowning at her tablet. "We just received a direct message from the Zerath Dominion." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual," he said calmly. "The Zerath rarely contacted diplomats directly." "Put it on screen," he said. The lights dimmed slightly as a holographic image appeared in the center of the room. At first the screen was dark. Then the image came into focus. Daniel's calm expression disappeared instantly. The video showed a cold metal room. 3 alien soldiers stood near the wall. Their tall armored bodies were impossible to mistake. Zerath warriors. And in the middle of the room, 2 humans sat on metal chairs. Daniel slowly stood up. It was his wife, Elena. And beside her was their 8-year-old daughter, Sophia. Sophia looked scared but tried to stay brave. Elena kept one arm around her daughter, protecting her as much as she could. Daniel felt the room grow colder. Behind them, a large alien officer stepped forward into the light. The creature's dark eyes stared directly into the camera. Then it spoke in a deep voice. "Ambassador Daniel Reyes of Earth." Lieutenant Collins looked shocked. "How did they?" Daniel raised a hand, stopping her. His eyes never left the screen. The alien commander continued. "You have spoken against the Zerath Dominion many times in the Galactic Council." The alien smiled slowly. "A mistake." The video zoomed slightly toward Elena and Sophia. "They are now our guests." Sophia tried to look brave, but her small hands trembled. Daniel's fist slowly tightened. The commander spoke again. "If Earth wishes to keep its diplomat alive, he will obey our instructions." The alien leaned closer to the camera. "You will return to Zerath space immediately. Alone. And you will convince your people to support Dominion control over the Orion trade routes." The room became silent. Then the alien added one final sentence. "If you refuse." The soldier behind Elena raised a weapon slightly. "Your family will not survive the week." The transmission ended. The hologram disappeared. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lieutenant Collins looked at Daniel carefully. "Sir." Daniel did not answer. He walked slowly toward the window, staring at the distant stars. His face looked calm. But inside, his thoughts moved like a storm. After several seconds, Collins spoke again. "We should contact Earth Command immediately." Daniel nodded once. "Yes," he said quietly. Less than 20 minutes later, the message had reached Earth. Inside the United Earth Defense Command, the video played on a massive screen. Military officers, government leaders, intelligence analysts. Everyone watched in silence. When the recording ended, the room stayed quiet for several seconds. Finally, Admiral Jonathan Hale, commander of Earth's Deep Space Fleet, spoke. "They took the ambassador's family." One of the council members looked angry. "This is blackmail." Another leader shook his head. "The Zerath believe we won't act." Admiral Hale folded his arms. "They think we're weak." A quiet voice spoke from the end of the table. "Are we?" Everyone looked toward the speaker. It was Earth's Secretary of Defense. The man pressed a button on the table. A star map appeared above them. Small blue lights began appearing across the map. Warships, carriers, destroyers, battleships, hundreds of them. The secretary spoke calmly. Send Ambassador Reyes back. Some people in the room looked surprised. But Admiral Hale understood immediately. And the fleet? He asked. The secretary looked at the growing cluster of blue lights. Then he gave the order. Mobilize everything. Across human space, silent signals traveled faster than light. Hidden shipyards activated. Massive warships powered their engines. Entire fleets left their stations. Deep in the darkness beyond the moon, one of the largest human armadas ever assembled slowly came to life. Thousands of lights ignited across its surface. The flagship at the center began to move first. The HFS Aegis of Earth. One by one, hundreds of ships aligned behind it. Back on the embassy station, Daniel Reyes prepared to leave. Lieutenant Collins watched as he stepped toward the transport ship. Sir, she said quietly, the Dominion thinks they control this situation. Daniel paused at the entrance ramp. For the first time since the message arrived. He smiled. A small, calm smile. They think they took a hostage, he said. Then he looked out into the stars. They have no idea what they've started. Far away in deep space, the human war fleet jumped into hyperspace. And the galaxy still believed humanity was weak. Rocket. The Zerath Dominion believed they had already won. In their minds, the situation was simple. They had taken the human diplomat's family. That meant the diplomat now belonged to them. So, Earth would belong to them too. Far from human space, the massive Zerath capital world Carthos Prime waited in silent confidence. Carthos Prime was a powerful planet. Huge cities covered its surface. Tall metal towers rose into the clouds, glowing with the cold blue lights of alien technology. Massive warships floated in orbit above the planet like silent guardians. For centuries the Zerath Dominion had ruled through fear. Planets that resisted them were destroyed. Species that refused to obey simply disappeared. So when their leaders captured the family of Earth's diplomat, they did not expect resistance. They expected surrender. Inside the Great Dominion Palace, a large chamber filled with alien commanders and political leaders. A tall Zerath officer stood near the center of the room. Commander Zerath Coral. He was the same alien who had delivered the message to Ambassador Daniel Reyes. Coral looked at the holographic display in front of him. It showed a single small ship approaching the planet. A human transport vessel. Coral smiled slowly. The diplomat has returned, he said. Around the chamber, other Zerath officers gave quiet laughs. Humans are predictable, one of them said. Threaten their families and they immediately obey. Another officer nodded. They talk about peace but they fear pain like everyone else. Commander Coral raised a clawed hand. Prepare the landing platform, he ordered. Our guests should feel welcomed. The other officers laughed again. High above the planet, the small human ship slowly entered orbit. Inside the cockpit, Ambassador Daniel Reyes sat calmly in the pilot's seat. The planet below filled the window. Carthos Prime. Home of the empire that had taken his family. For a moment, Daniel stared silently at the glowing world. Behind him, the ship's computer spoke in a calm voice. Dominion Control has granted landing permission. Daniel nodded. Understood. The ship slowly moved toward the surface. If anyone had been watching him closely, they might have noticed something strange. Daniel did not look afraid. He did not look angry either. He looked focused. As the ship descended, a small indicator light blinked quietly on the control panel. A hidden communication channel had just activated. Far beyond the system, deep in dark space, a signal reached the first ship of the approaching human fleet. Hours earlier, in a silent region between stars, the human defense fleet moved through hyperspace. Hundreds of massive ships traveled together like a giant metal storm. Destroyers, heavy cruisers, carriers filled with strike fighters. And at the center of them all, the enormous flagship HFS Aegis of Earth. Inside its command bridge, Admiral Jonathan Hale stood in front of a large star map. The map showed the Zerath system ahead. Around it, hundreds of small blue lights represented human warships. Fleet officers watched the display carefully. One of them spoke. Admiral, the ambassador's signal just activated. Hale nodded once. Status. Ambassador Reyes has entered the Zerath system successfully. Another officer turned from her console. Dominion sensors have not detected our fleet yet. That was not surprising. Human stealth technology had advanced far beyond what most alien empires expected. Hale studied the star map. "We hold position outside their detection range," he ordered. "How long until full fleet arrival?" 6 hours, sir." Hale crossed his arms. "Good." The officers on the bridge understood the plan. The Diplomat's return was only the beginning. Back on Carthos Prime, Daniel's ship landed on a large metal platform outside the Dominion Palace. Heavy alien soldiers waited nearby. Their armor was dark and intimidating, and their weapons were already pointed toward the human ship. The ship's door slowly opened. Daniel Reyes stepped out. The wind of the alien world moved his coat slightly as he walked down the ramp. He stopped at the bottom and looked around. Dozens of Zerath soldiers surrounded him. Commander Coral walked forward slowly. The tall alien stared down at the human diplomat with clear amusement. "So," Coral said, his deep voice echoing across the platform, "the human returns." Daniel met the alien's eyes calmly. "You asked me to come," Daniel replied. Coral smiled again. "Yes. And you came very quickly." Daniel did not answer. The commander stepped closer. "You understand your situation, Ambassador?" "Yes," Daniel said quietly. Coral pointed toward the palace behind him. "Good. Then you will cooperate." He leaned slightly closer. "Your family's safety depends on it." For a brief moment, silence filled the landing platform. Then Daniel nodded once. "I understand." The commander seemed satisfied. "Excellent." He turned toward the soldiers. "Escort our guest inside." 2 armored warriors stepped forward. Daniel allowed them to guide him toward the massive palace entrance. But as he walked, he looked briefly toward the sky. Far above the clouds, the dark emptiness of space waited. Invisible to every Zerath scanner, something enormous was slowly entering the system. Deep in orbit beyond the outer planets, the first wave of human warships exited hyperspace. One after another, giant vessels appeared in the darkness. Their engines glowed softly as they moved into silent formation. Moments later, more ships arrived. Then more. Within minutes, hundreds of human warships surrounded the outer edge of the system. Admiral Hale watched the growing fleet on the star map. The blue lights multiplied rapidly. An officer spoke. "Admiral, the fleet is now at 300 ships." Another voice followed. 400. Hale's expression remained calm. "Continue silent approach." "Yes, sir." The warships moved closer to the inner system. Still invisible. Still silent. Back inside the Dominion Palace, Daniel Reyes walked calmly through the long metal corridors. Alien guards followed closely behind him. Commander Coral walked beside him, clearly pleased. "You see, Ambassador," Coral said proudly, "the galaxy respects strength." Daniel glanced at him briefly. "Is that so?" "Yes," the alien replied. "And your people will soon understand that." They stopped in front of a large door. Coral turned toward him again. "Soon you will speak to the Dominion Council. You will tell them that Earth accepts our control of the Orion trade routes." Daniel said nothing. Coral leaned closer again. "Because if you don't..." The alien smiled darkly. "Your family dies." For a moment, Daniel looked directly into the alien's eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "I will speak to your council." Coral seemed pleased again. "Good." The doors opened. But far above the planet, hidden in the darkness of space, the human fleet continued to arrive. 500 ships. 600 ships. And still growing. The storm was forming. And the Zerath Dominion had no idea. Rocket. The Zerath Dominion Palace stood at the center of Carthos Prime like a mountain of black metal. From the outside it looked beautiful and powerful. Towers rose high into the clouds, glowing with blue lights. Alien ships moved in the sky above it like silent guardians. But inside the palace the air felt heavy. Ambassador Daniel Reyes walked through long metal halls surrounded by Zerath soldiers. Their armor was dark and sharp, their weapons always ready. They watched him closely. To them he was not a diplomat anymore. He was a hostage. Commander Zerath Coral walked beside him with slow, confident steps. "You should feel honored, Ambassador," Coral said with a small smile. "Few outsiders are allowed inside the Dominion Palace." Daniel looked around the hallway calmly. Tall metal walls. Armed guards at every door. Security cameras watching every movement. "Yes," Daniel replied quietly. "I feel very honored." The sarcasm in his voice was small, but Coral heard it. The alien gave a low laugh. "You humans are strange. Even when you lose, you still try to sound proud." Daniel did not answer. He simply kept walking. Soon they reached a large chamber. Massive doors opened slowly with a deep metallic sound. Inside waited the Dominion Council. More than 20 Zerath leaders sat in a large circular room. Their tall bodies rested in dark metal chairs while glowing screens floated in the air around them. In the center of the chamber stood a single platform. Commander Coral pointed toward it. "Step forward, Ambassador." Daniel walked slowly to the center of the room. Every alien eye in the chamber focused on him. One of the older council members leaned forward. "So this is the famous human diplomat," the alien said. "The one who believes peace can control the galaxy." Another council member spoke with clear amusement. "Humans always talk about peace, until someone stronger arrives." A few council members laughed quietly. Daniel stood still, calm as always. He had faced angry leaders before. But this time was different. This time, his family's lives were part of the game. The largest alien in the chamber finally spoke. This was Emperor Valak, ruler of the Zerath Dominion. His deep voice filled the room. "Ambassador Reyes," the Emperor said slowly, "you understand why you are here." Daniel nodded once. "Yes." Valak leaned forward slightly. "Then speak." The Emperor pointed one long claw toward the center platform. "You will send a message to Earth. You will tell them to accept Zerath control over the Orion trade routes." His eyes narrowed. "And you will explain that refusing would be unfortunate for your family." The room became silent again. Daniel looked slowly around the chamber. Every alien watched him, waiting, expecting him to break. Instead, Daniel took a slow breath. "I will speak to Earth," he said. A few council members nodded with satisfaction. But Daniel raised one finger. "There is one condition." The room suddenly filled with whispers. Commander Coral frowned. "You are not in a position to demand conditions, human." Daniel looked directly at the Emperor. "I am not demanding," he said calmly. "I am asking." Emperor Valak studied him for a long moment. Finally he spoke. "Say it." Daniel kept his voice steady. "I want proof that my family is alive." Some council members laughed again. But the Emperor raised a hand and the room became quiet. Valak turned to Commander Coral. "Show him." Coral pressed a button on his wrist device. A holographic screen appeared above the center of the chamber. The same cold metal room appeared again. Daniel's wife Elena sat beside their daughter Sophia. Sophia looked tired but unharmed. Elena held her close, whispering something to comfort her. Daniel felt a small wave of relief inside his chest. But his face stayed calm. "They are alive," Coral said proudly. "For now." The hologram disappeared. Valak leaned back in his throne. "You have seen them," the Emperor said. "Now you will obey." Daniel lowered his head slightly. "As you wish." The council seemed satisfied. They believed the human diplomat had accepted defeat. But none of them noticed the small signal device hidden inside Daniel's wrist. A quiet pulse moved through it. The signal traveled far beyond the planet, beyond the inner system, to the dark region of space where the human fleet waited. Far away in orbit near the outer planets, hundreds of human warships floated silently. Their engines were almost completely dark. Their weapon systems were powered but hidden. From the outside, the fleet looked like shadows drifting in space. Inside the flagship HFS Aegis of Earth, Admiral Jonathan Hale stood on the command bridge. A young officer suddenly spoke. "Admiral, we just received another signal from Ambassador Reyes." Hale turned toward the main display. "Status." "Confirmation code received," the officer replied. Another technician checked the fleet map. "Fleet count now at 700 ships, sir." More ships continued to arrive from hyperspace. Heavy battleships, missile cruisers, strike carriers filled with fighters. Hale looked at the growing formation. "Dominion sensors?" he asked. "Still blind to our presence." Hale nodded slowly. "Good." Another officer looked at the map carefully. "At this rate, Admiral, we will have over 1,000 ships in position within the next few hours." Hale's voice stayed calm. "That should be enough." The bridge crew exchanged small smiles. Everyone understood what that meant. Back on Carthos Prime, Daniel Reyes walked out of the council chamber under heavy guard. Commander Coral walked beside him again. "You performed well, Ambassador," Coral said. Daniel glanced at him. "I simply did what was necessary." Coral gave another dark smile. "Yes, you humans always do what is necessary." They walked down another long corridor. Daniel's thoughts moved quickly. Every second he delayed the council. The human fleet grew larger. Every conversation bought more time. And time was exactly what Earth needed. Coral suddenly stopped walking. "We will contact Earth tomorrow," the alien commander said. "You will deliver your message then." Daniel nodded. "Understood." The commander studied him carefully. "You seem very calm for someone whose family is about to die if he fails." Daniel looked directly at the alien. "Humans are good at staying calm under pressure." Coral gave a quiet laugh. "Yes, I have noticed." The commander turned and walked away. Alien guards escorted Daniel toward his temporary room. But as Daniel looked up through a tall palace window, he could see the night sky above Carthos Prime. Hundreds of stars glowed in the darkness. And hidden among those stars, an entire human war fleet was silently moving closer. The storm was almost ready. And soon, the Zerath Dominion would finally see it. Rocket. Morning arrived on Carthos Prime. The great cities of the Zerath Dominion slowly came to life. Transport ships moved between tall towers. Military patrols crossed the sky above the capital. On the surface, everything looked normal. The Zerath people believed their empire was safe. They had no reason to think otherwise. For centuries, no enemy had ever threatened their capital world. Inside the Dominion Palace, Ambassador Daniel Reyes stood near a tall window in his temporary room. He looked out at the alien city below. Cold metal towers. Crowded flight lanes. Heavy military ships guarding the skies. To most people, the planet looked untouchable. But Daniel knew something the Zerath did not. He quietly checked the small device hidden inside his wrist. A tiny light blinked once. A new signal had arrived. That meant only one thing. The fleet was ready. Daniel allowed himself a small breath. Then he turned as the door behind him opened. Two Zerath soldiers entered the room. "Ambassador Reyes," one of them said in a deep voice. "The Dominion Council is ready for you." Daniel nodded calmly. "Lead the way." Minutes later, Daniel walked again through the massive halls of the Dominion Palace. This time the building felt different. Not because of the guards. Not because of the council. But because of what was waiting beyond the sky. Commander Zerath Coral met him outside the council chamber doors. "You slept well, Ambassador?" the alien asked. "Well enough," Daniel replied. Coral smiled slightly. "Good. Today will be important." The massive doors slowly opened again. Inside, the Dominion Council waited. More leaders had arrived than before. Military commanders stood beside political rulers. Armed guards watched from every corner. At the center of the room, a large holographic communication platform had been activated. This time the entire galaxy would watch. Emperor Valak sat on his throne at the far side of the chamber. When Daniel entered, the Emperor raised a hand. "Ambassador Reyes," Valak said slowly, "today you will speak to your world." Daniel walked calmly to the center platform. "Understood." A council officer activated the communication system. Above them, a giant holographic screen appeared. The image connected to Earth's diplomatic network. To the Zerath leaders, it looked like the perfect moment. The human diplomat would surrender. And the galaxy would see it happen. Emperor Valak leaned forward. "Send your message," he ordered. Daniel looked up at the holographic display. For a moment he said nothing. The room was completely silent. Every alien watched him closely. Commander Coral stood near the wall, clearly enjoying the moment. Finally Daniel spoke. "My name is Ambassador Daniel Reyes of Earth." His voice was calm and clear. "I am speaking from the capital world of the Zerath Dominion." The council members nodded with satisfaction. Everything was going exactly as they expected. Daniel continued. "The Zerath Dominion has demanded that humanity surrender control of the Orion trade routes." Valak leaned back proudly. "But before I respond," Daniel added quietly, "I would like to ask a simple question." Some council members frowned. Valak narrowed his eyes. "What question?" Daniel looked directly at the Emperor. "Have you checked your space scanners today?" The room suddenly grew very quiet. Commander Coral frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Daniel remained calm. "I believe your fleet commanders should check." Several Zerath officers quickly looked toward their control screens. At first nothing happened. Then one officer froze. His eyes widened. That's impossible." Another officer stood up suddenly. Multiple energy signatures detected. The room exploded into noise. More officers activated their scanners. Every screen in the chamber began flashing warnings. Commander Coral grabbed a nearby display and stared at it. His expression changed instantly. "No." The holographic map above the council chamber suddenly shifted. Dozens of red warning symbols appeared in orbit around the planet. Then hundreds. Then more. Alien officers began shouting across the room. Unidentified fleet detected. Ships appearing across multiple orbital zones. Energy signatures off the scale. The red symbols continued multiplying. Hundreds. Then over 1,000. The entire planet was surrounded. Commander Coral stared at the map in disbelief. Human ships, he whispered. The council chamber fell silent again. This time it was a silence filled with fear. Emperor Valak slowly stood from his throne. How many? He demanded. One trembling officer answered. Over 1,000 warships, Your Majesty. Shock spread across the room. The Zerath Dominion had powerful fleets. But none of them were near the capital system. They had never expected an enemy attack. And now, it was too late. Daniel Reyes stood calmly at the center of the chamber. He looked around at the terrified alien leaders. Then he spoke again. Humanity has responded to your message. Commander Coral turned toward him with anger. You tricked us. Daniel shook his head slightly. No. He pointed toward the holographic map. You threatened the family of a human diplomat. Outside the planet's atmosphere, the human war fleet moved into full formation. Massive battleships surrounded the planet like silent giants. Carriers opened their launch bays. Destroyers powered their weapon systems. At the center of the formation, the flagship HFS Aegis of Earth moved slowly into position. Inside its command bridge, Admiral Jonathan Hale watched the planet on the main display. An officer spoke. Admiral, Dominion fleet activity minimal. Their defenses are not ready. Hale nodded once. Open communication channel. The officer activated the transmitter. Back inside the Dominion Council chamber, every screen suddenly changed. A new image appeared. Admiral Hale stood on the bridge of the human flagship. His voice filled the chamber. This is Admiral Jonathan Hale of the United Earth Defense Fleet. The Zerath leaders stared at him in shock. Hale continued calmly. You currently have 1,200 human warships in orbit around your capital world. He paused briefly. Then he spoke the only sentence that mattered. Release the hostages. Silence filled the chamber. Then the Admiral finished his message. Or we begin removing your military targets, one by one. The storm had arrived. And the Zerath Dominion finally understood their mistake. Rocket. The Dominion Council chamber was completely silent. Just minutes earlier, the Zerath leaders had believed they controlled everything. They believed the human diplomat was trapped. Now the truth stood in front of them. Their capital world was surrounded. Over 1,000 human warships floated in orbit around Carthos Prime. And every one of them was armed. Emperor Valak slowly stepped down from his throne. His tall armored body moved with controlled anger, but the tension in the room was impossible to hide. The holographic map above the chamber still showed the human fleet. Blue symbols filled the space around the planet. Battleships, cruisers, carriers, destroyers. The human fleet had formed a perfect circle around the system. There was no escape. Commander Zerath Coral stared at the map in disbelief. This is impossible, he said quietly. Our sensors should have seen them. One of the Dominion officers shook his head nervously. They use stealth technology, far more advanced than we expected. Another officer looked terrified. They are already within firing range of our orbital defenses. The council members began whispering among themselves. For the first time in centuries, the rulers of the Zerath Dominion felt something unfamiliar. Fear. In the center of the chamber, Ambassador Daniel Reyes stood calmly. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply watched. Emperor Valak finally turned toward him. You planned this, the Emperor said slowly. Daniel answered calmly. You kidnapped the family of a human diplomat. The Emperor's eyes burned with anger. You brought an army to our capital world. Daniel nodded slightly. You threatened my daughter. The room fell silent again. No one spoke, because everyone understood the message. Humans did not respond to threats quietly. High above the planet, the human defense fleet waited. Hundreds of massive ships floated in silent formation. The flagship HFS Aegis of Earth stood at the center like a giant shield protecting the rest of the fleet. Inside the command bridge, Admiral Jonathan Hale watched the Dominion capital on the main screen. The entire planet slowly rotated below them. Cities glowing. Defense stations activating. Military ships rushing out of orbital docks. But it was already too late. A young officer looked at the incoming data. Admiral, Dominion fleet response is disorganized. Another officer added, their main war fleets are still several systems away. Hale nodded. They never expected an attack on their capital. The communications officer turned toward him. Still no response from the Dominion Council, sir. Hale crossed his arms. They will answer. He looked again at the planet. Eventually, back inside the council chamber, panic slowly spread among the Zerath leaders. One council member spoke nervously. Your Majesty, our planetary shields cannot withstand that many warships. Another added quickly, even if our fleets return, it will take hours. Commander Coral clenched his fists. We should destroy the hostages immediately, he growled. Show the humans we are not afraid. Several council members looked horrified. That would guarantee our destruction, one of them said. Coral turned toward the Emperor. Humans respect strength. If we kill the family, they may hesitate. Daniel finally spoke again. No. Every alien looked toward him. Daniel's voice stayed calm. If you harm them, this planet becomes a battlefield. His eyes moved slowly across the room. And I promise you, humans are very good at war. The words echoed through the chamber. The council members looked at the holographic map again. More human ships continued arriving in orbit. Even now the fleet was still growing. Emperor Valak raised his hand and the room became quiet. The ruler of the Zerath Dominion walked slowly toward the center platform. He stood only a few steps away from Daniel. You humans pretend to value peace, Valak said quietly. Daniel answered calmly. We do. Valak's voice grew colder. Yet you bring a war fleet to my home. Daniel did not move. You threatened innocent people. Valak studied him for several long seconds. Then he asked one final question. If we release your family, will your fleet leave? Daniel answered without hesitation. Yes. The Emperor looked around the chamber. His commanders looked nervous. His council members looked terrified. And above their heads, over 1,000 human warships waited silently in orbit. Valak finally made his decision. He turned toward Commander Coral. Bring the hostages. Coral looked shocked. Your Majesty. That was not a suggestion, the Emperor said coldly. The commander hesitated. Then he bowed his head slightly. Yes, Your Majesty. Coral quickly left the chamber with several guards. The council room remained silent. Daniel stood calmly. Minutes passed slowly. Finally, the large doors opened again. Commander Coral returned. 2 soldiers walked behind him. Between them were Elena and Sophia. Sophia's eyes widened when she saw her father. Daddy? The little girl ran forward before the guards could stop her. Daniel knelt and caught her in his arms. For the first time since arriving on the planet, his calm expression finally broke. He held his daughter tightly. Elena stepped closer, tears in her eyes. You came, she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. Of course I did. Behind them, the Zerath Council watched in silence. For them, this moment felt like defeat. But for Daniel, this was exactly what he came for. He stood up slowly, holding Sophia's hand. Then he turned toward the Emperor. My family is free. Valak nodded once. Yes. Daniel looked toward the large windows of the chamber. High above the planet, the human fleet still filled the sky. Then it's time for us to leave, he said. But the story was not over yet. Because the galaxy had just learned something important. Humans might prefer peace. But when someone threatened their family, they brought the entire fleet. Rocket. The council chamber remained silent as Ambassador Daniel Reyes stood beside his family. His daughter Sophia still held his hand tightly, as if she was afraid someone might take her away again. His wife Elena stood close to him, her eyes moving carefully across the alien leaders who had held them prisoner. Across the chamber, Emperor Valak watched the human family with a cold expression. For the first time in centuries, the ruler of the Zerath Dominion had been forced to step back. And everyone in the room knew it. Commander Zerath Coral stood near the wall, his claws clenched with quiet anger. He hated what had just happened. The Dominion had power. The Dominion had armies. But today, the humans had arrived faster. Above their capital world, the human fleet still filled the sky. Hundreds of giant warships. Battleships armed with weapons strong enough to break planetary defenses. Carriers ready to release thousands of strike fighters. Missile cruisers prepared for bombardment. And at the center of them all, the massive flagship HFS Aegis of Earth. The message was clear. Earth had not come for negotiations. Earth had come to protect its own. Daniel slowly turned toward the Emperor. My family is safe now, he said calmly. Valak nodded once. Yes. His voice remained steady, but the tension inside the chamber was obvious. Daniel continued. Then our agreement stands. You release the hostages, and the fleet leaves your system. Valak looked toward the holographic star map floating above the chamber. Thousands of blue signals surrounded Carthos Prime. Even now, more human ships waited just outside the system. If a battle started, the Dominion capital would suffer heavy damage. And the Emperor knew it. Finally, Valak spoke again. "You may leave." The words echoed through the chamber. Commander Coral looked shocked. "Your Majesty." Valak raised his hand and Coral immediately stopped talking. The Emperor's eyes moved slowly toward the human diplomat. "But remember this, Ambassador Reyes," Valak said quietly. "The Zerath Dominion does not forget humiliation." Daniel met his gaze calmly. "And humans do not forget threats." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel gently guided his daughter toward the exit. Elena walked beside him. Alien soldiers opened the massive doors. The human family walked out of the chamber. No one tried to stop them. Behind them, the rulers of the Dominion watched in silence. They had captured the diplomat's family to control Earth. Instead, they had brought an entire human war fleet to their own capital. Outside the palace, the sky of Carthos Prime was filled with moving ships. Dominion fighters and patrol craft rushed through the air, trying to organize defenses. But far above them, something far more powerful waited. The human fleet. Daniel, Elena, and Sophia were escorted to the landing platform where the small human transport ship waited. A group of alien guards stood nearby, watching carefully. Commander Coral followed them outside. He stopped a few meters away from Daniel. "You may have won today," the alien commander said quietly. Daniel looked at him. This wasn't about winning. Coral's eyes narrowed. Then what was it about? Daniel placed a hand gently on Sophia's shoulder. "Family." For a moment, Coral said nothing. Then he gave a cold smile. "You humans are strange." Daniel shrugged slightly. "Maybe." The commander stepped back and signaled the guards. "Let them board." The ramp of the human ship slowly lowered. Daniel helped Sophia walk inside first. Elena followed. Before entering the ship, Daniel turned once more toward the alien commander. "One more thing," he said. Coral frowned. "What?" Daniel looked up at the sky above the city. "You should probably tell your emperor something." Coral crossed his arms. "And what is that?" Daniel spoke calmly. "If anyone in the galaxy ever threatens a human family again." He paused for a moment. "This fleet will look small compared to the next one." Then Daniel stepped inside the ship. The ramp slowly closed. Moments later, the small vessel lifted from the landing platform. It rose into the sky and moved toward orbit. Commander Coral watched silently as the ship disappeared into the clouds. High above the planet, Admiral Jonathan Hale stood on the bridge of the HFS Aegis of Earth. An officer suddenly spoke. "Admiral, the ambassador's ship has entered orbit." Hale nodded. "Prepare escort." Two human destroyers moved toward the small transport ship, protecting it as it approached the fleet. Another officer looked at the tactical display. "Dominion forces are standing down, sir." Hale allowed himself a small smile. "Good choice." Minutes later, the ambassador's ship docked safely inside one of the fleet carriers. The communications officer looked back at Hale. "Ambassador and family confirmed safe." Hale turned toward the star map. "Very well." He took a slow breath. Then he gave the final order. "Signal the fleet." The officer nodded. "Message ready." Hale spoke clearly. "All ships, prepare for departure." Across the massive formation, hundreds of warships began powering their engines. Blue lights glowed across the dark side of the planet. The giant fleet slowly turned away from Carthos Prime. But before leaving the system, Admiral Hale sent one final transmission to the Zerath Dominion. His voice echoed across every military channel in the system. "This is Admiral Hale of the United Earth Defense Fleet." There was a brief pause. Then he finished the message. "Humanity prefers peace." The fleet engines began to glow brighter. "But if you threaten our people..." The massive ships started jumping into hyperspace one by one. "We bring the fleet." And with that, the human war fleet disappeared into the stars. But the warning remained behind. And the Zerath Dominion would never forget it. Rocket. The stars above Carthos Prime slowly returned to normal. Only hours earlier, the sky had been filled with the largest human war fleet the Zerath Dominion had ever seen. Thousands of engines glowing in the darkness. Hundreds of warships pointing their weapons toward the planet. But now the sky was empty again. One by one, the human ships had disappeared into hyperspace. The storm had passed. Yet the fear they left behind remained. Inside the Dominion Palace, Emperor Valak stood silently near a tall window. Below him, the massive city stretched across the planet's surface. Traffic had returned. Military patrols were flying again. But the Emperor knew something had changed. For the first time in centuries, the Zerath Dominion had been forced to retreat. Behind him, several council members spoke quietly among themselves. Commander Zerath Coral stood nearby, still angry. "They humiliated us," Coral said bitterly. Valak did not turn around. "Yes," the Emperor replied. Coral clenched his claws. "We should prepare for war." Valak slowly turned to face him. "War?" The Emperor walked across the chamber slowly. "You saw their fleet." Coral remained silent. Valak continued. "That was not their entire navy." The room became quiet. Everyone understood what the Emperor meant. If that fleet had only been a response to one hostage crisis, then the full strength of humanity was something far larger. Valak stopped near the center of the room. "For now, we observe." The council members nodded slowly, because deep down they all understood something important. Humans were not the weak species the galaxy believed them to be. They were patient. They were calm. But when pushed too far, they became dangerous. Several days later, news of the incident spread across the galaxy. Trade stations, military bases, alien governments. Everyone heard the same story. A powerful empire had kidnapped the family of a human diplomat. And in response, Earth had sent an entire war fleet to their capital world. Many species were shocked. Some refused to believe it. But the evidence was impossible to deny. Long-range sensors from nearby systems had recorded the fleet. Over 1,000 human warships moving together in perfect formation. No chaos. No hesitation. Just silent power. The message was clear. Humanity might talk about peace, but they were always ready for war. Far away on Earth, the atmosphere felt very different. A quiet transport ship landed at a military spaceport. Waiting near the landing platform were several government officials and soldiers. The ship door opened. Ambassador Daniel Reyes stepped out first. Then Elena. And finally little Sophia holding both of their hands. The small girl looked around at the bright blue sky of Earth. "Are we home?" she asked. Daniel smiled warmly. "Yes." Sophia ran forward happily as several soldiers greeted them. Elena looked at Daniel with relief. "It's finally over." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." But he knew the story was already spreading across the stars. Every empire in the galaxy was talking about the same event. The day humanity surrounded an entire planet. All to protect one family. A military officer approached Daniel and saluted. "Ambassador Reyes, welcome home." Daniel returned the salute politely. "Thank you." The officer smiled slightly. "You caused quite a reaction out there." Daniel glanced up toward the sky. Somewhere beyond those blue clouds, the human fleet was still traveling through deep space. Returning to their stations. Preparing for whatever came next. Daniel spoke quietly. "I didn't cause it." The officer looked curious. "Then who did?" Daniel gently placed his arm around Sophia. "The people who thought threatening a human family was a good idea." The officer chuckled softly. "Fair point." Weeks later, a meeting of the Galactic Council took place. Leaders from dozens of alien civilizations gathered to discuss one topic. Humanity. Some species were nervous. Others were impressed. One council member finally asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What have we learned from this situation?" The room became quiet. An older alien representative spoke slowly. "We have learned that humans are peaceful." A few leaders nodded. But the alien continued. "They prefer diplomacy, negotiation, cooperation." Then he raised one finger. "But we have also learned something else." The room leaned forward slightly. The alien finished his sentence calmly. "If you threaten a human," he paused, "you may face their soldiers." Another pause filled the chamber. Then he added the final words. "But if you threaten a human family," the council room remained completely silent. "You will face their entire fleet." And from that day forward, a new rule quietly spread across the galaxy. Never threaten a human diplomat. Never threaten a human family. Because somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the human fleet was always watching. And if the call ever came again, they would return. Even stronger than before. Rocket.